A very good morning. At the outset, I would like to thank the Chairman Scientific Committee and the Organizing Secretary for giving us this opportunity to share our views. I'd also like to thank our Chief Instructor for giving me the opportunity to share my ideas on keratometry and biometry and how to make it accurate. As we all know, it's a process where we measure the power of the cornea, the length of the eye, and then use minor details, mainly the intraocular lens power calculation, to decide the exact IOL power. Several values are important: accurate corneal power, accurate axial length, and nowadays with the use of more of premium IOLs, accurate prediction of the estimated lens position is probably the most important part. Desired refraction is going to play a role if you are aiming for monovision. A good understanding of IOL powers is a must. We start with keratometry. On a rough estimate, one diopter of error will give rise to a one diopter of postoperative refractive errors. There are various methods of doing keratometry, which is also called as an ophthalmometry, a manual method, a topographic method, or a Placido disc method, the autokeratometers, and now with the non-contact biometers where you have IOL master and Lenstar, which also give an idea about the keratometry values. The basic keratometer, or what we call as manual keratometer, works on two principles. Either it's variable doubling or it's fixed doubling. The doubling principle is important to take care of the errors due to the involuntary movements of the eye, which causes blur on the image of the cornea. So prism is introduced in the optical system. A procedure which is routine for all manual keratometry has to be followed. 2-3 important things is you need to adjust the room light, and the focusing of the Myers has to be proper. Once they are focused, you need to align the Myers to get the horizontal and vertical axis and the K readings, which has to be noted. So for accurate manual keratometry, you need to measure in low ambient light. You ensure a really good tear film. If you find that the anterior ocular surface is disturbed, you can use an artificial tear and then take the reading. You adjust your eyepiece to bring the central crosshair in focus so that the error from the examiner side is negated. Make sure that the patient's other eye is occluded so that he is fixing centrally. Take average of at least 3 readings, and in a scarred cornea, you need to take average of the fellow eye if it's not possible. Automated keratometer have an advantage of eliminating the operator's subjectivity. Here, because the light emitting diodes are the Myers and the image is taken by solid state detectors, the error is decreased. The response is quite fast, and so the doubling process is not needed. You also have a handheld keratometer, which is used in special situations like infants, patients with restricted physical mobility, and patients in supine position who are not able to sit up to your manual keratometers or even an auto keratometer. Again, fixating correctly is important. Take care that the eyelid doesn't obscure your image. There are certain situations which are difficult. One is where the patient's fixation is really poor. Multiple reasons for it. As I told you, and disturbed anterior ocular surface will produce a poor tear film. Nystagmus, because the patient is not able to fix it. But again, here the catch is try to make the patient close both the eyes, and as soon as the patient opens the eye, take the reading, because that is the time where the movement of nystagmus is minimal. In post-refractive surgery, probably you need to shift to more of a tomography or topography rather than depending on manual keratometers. There has to be a validation criteria for all values which you are taking. And for keratometry, these are the validation criteria. You need to repeat or check with some other instrument when the corneal power is either the cornea is too steep or too flat. The difference between two eyes is more than one diopter. You have a high astigmatism. The patient has had a previous refractive surgery, and if you feel that you are not sure of what readings you are taking. There are multiple sources of keratometry errors, and you need to make sure that you don't get into that tangle. An unfocused eyepiece, failure to calibrate the unit, poor patient fixation, dry eye, drooping of eyelids, and irregular cornea. There are various ways to calibrate a manual keratometer. You have steel spheres which are used of different radius of curvature, which is 40.25, 42.25, and 44.25. Another way is we use day-to-day different lenses, so they themselves can be used to calibrate the manual keratometers. Again, starting from the most flat to the steeper lenses, 35 diopter, 42.2 diopter, and 54.9. As we all know, technology advanced and so has keratometer. From traditional manual to we went to Placido disc topographers. There is a limitation because the evaluation of the anterior corneal surface is only possible. The posterior corneal surface is not possible, but still with a sophisticated data, we extrapolate. The newer diagnostic machines allow us to even measure or image the back surface of the cornea, which can be directly evaluated by elevation changes of both anterior and posterior surface. There are tomographers which now create 3D images of the cornea in cross section. To sum up these image technologies, there is a three-dimensional tomography with different machines. There is a slit scanning technology. There is a very high frequency ultrasonic technology, and there is a high-speed anterior segment OCT technology. All of them have their advantages and disadvantages. Mainly, they measure the curvature, power, and shape. Others are better suited for measuring the corneal anatomy, including flap placement, stromal scar depth, and intrastromal ring segment placement. So, depending upon what you want out of your examination, you can use different instruments. Precision of a keratometry is always important, and as you asked, what is the best technique? These are the details. A Jawalshi or a manual keratometer measures anywhere between 3.2 to 3.4 millimeter of the central cornea. Automated normally will measure around 3 millimeter of the center cornea. So is the Pentacam, which is measuring about 3 millimeter depending upon the Scheimpflug technology. When you go to the newer machines with automated and SMI, it is about 1.9 millimeter. With the Carl Zeiss IOL Master, it is 2.3, and with the Lenstar, there are multiple points. So theoretically, Lenstar will give slightly more accurate values as compared to IOL Master because multiple points and two regions are analyzed.
Excuse me. Yeah. What about the irregular corneas? This is okay for the regular corneas, but suppose a patient has a corneal trauma and they have a very irregular cornea. How you consider the keratometry in those patients?
There are two ways. If it is grossly irregular, probably we'll have to examine the other eye. That's what I told in my initial slides. If the scar is not central and paracentral, probably central readings can be extrapolated with the newer technology where they make a 3D image of the cornea and you can choose different regions and probably extrapolate. You have a scar which is running in 3 and 4 millimeter area in a particular quadrant, the rest of the regions are normal. So probably when you have tomographers or topographers which give K readings in different optical zones, you can extrapolate and measure that readings and use them.
So measure for the messages for the audience is that for such kind of irregular corneas, you have to go for the topographic keratometric reading rather than your manual one.
See, end of the day, what is going to be more important is you stick to a particular machine, try to standardize. As I told you, when you are looking for, say, toric IOL implantation and an axis, probably tomographers or topographers work well. But when you are trying to measure the power of the cornea in dioptric values, a manual will be holding a slightly better edge in normal corneas. Because anyway, these are extrapolated readings. Still, no system is foolproof because what we are doing is we are assuming the refractive index of cornea to be of particular value, and it is going to be varying from subjectively eye to eye. So end of the day, stick to a particular machine. What we'll have to do is all these measurements for measuring the IOL are having an error. And that's where personalizing your A constant will come into picture. Because if you stick to particular machines, whether it is for your axial length measurement or a keratometry measurement and a particular technique of surgery, probably all of them will compound to those errors which can be corrected by personalizing your A constant. Going to the axial length measurement part, traditionally it has been measured by an ultrasonography machine. Again, the error is about 1.75 diopter per millimeter for longer eyes and 3.75 diopter per millimeter of error for shorter eyes. So again, each millimeter of error can amount to lot of post-operative hematropia, which has to. There are mainly different methods of measuring and biometry. It is either an applanation or a contact one, an immersion one, an immersion AB scan vector analysis, non-contact one where you have a partial coherence interferometry. Now we are going to different methods for that also. The A-scan biometry mainly works on the principle of piezoelectric phenomenon and acoustic impedance. Probably You have three components: the transducer, the amplifier, and the display monitor. What an A-scan does is a thin parallel sound beam is emitted from the probe with an echo bouncing back into the probe, and then the sound beam strikes the interface. There are multiple interfaces in all ultrasonographic machine, and eye is no different. You have interfaces where the refractive index of a medium changes, and that is what is going to be useful to define the accuracy of machines. The echoes are reverberated back and are converted into spikes from the baseline. The greater the difference in the reverberations and the refractive index, the higher will be the interface of each medium. Spike height is affected by the different density of the medium as well as the angle where the probe is directed to. For a perfect spike height, you need to be perpendicular. If there is a gross macular pathology, probably it is a bit difficult to get a good reading from a contact biometer. The gain settings are in decibels. When you increase the gain, especially the visualization of weaker signals become better, but the resolution is adversely affected. When the gain is lower, the weaker signals are less visualized, but resolution improves, and that's where the accuracy also improves. So try to keep your gain as minimum as possible and get the best readings with the highest spikes. The more the density of the cataract, you might have to increase the gain to get a better reading. Again, gates are also important. These are electronic calipers which are going to define. So the ascending edge of the gate has to be appropriate for each spike, and that is going to help you determine the accuracy of your reading. End of the day, it is the distance which is measured with the velocity and time. And sound velocity has been calculated and taken in a particular value, which are different for different situations. For phakic, aphakic, pseudophakic eyes, there is collection for IOL, which is for different for PMMA material, acrylic material, and silicon material. And if you have an IOL, you can give correction factors for them, which is for different again for different IOLs. To compare phakic and pseudophakic readings, if you have a pseudophakic eye, there will be a lot of reverberation echoes which are there in the vitreous cavity. So this is again giving you an idea about the echo. To summarize, for accurate measurement of the biometry, you should ensure that the machine is calibrated well and the mode which you select are proper. The gain should be selected to the lowest level. You should not push too hard for the contact biometry, otherwise pressing the cornea normal will give you an error. The echoes from all the surfaces has to be good. An average of at least 5 to 10 readings has to be taken with the least standard deviation possible. However, with the best of the hands and the best of the machine, an accurate, consistent biometry with a contact probe is practically nearly impossible. Now in an era of where you are implanting premium IOLs day in and day out, probably one message if you can take from this lecture is stop doing or stop using this method unless it is needed. There are better methods available, and please don't use it. There are mental inhibition of using an immersion method, but actually there is nothing complicated about it. You get consistent reading when you use a Prager shell. You don't need to use a corneal contact or compression which is needed in a contact method. There is less operator dependent, and it improves the consistency as well as resolution. Though there are limitations of this method also, because the 10 megahertz A-scan is quite broad and the foveal thickness is variable, but still compared to the contact method, this is much more accurate. So there are certain things which we need to understand, and contrary to popular belief, it is quite simple, and it often takes less time than a contact method, because there you need to repeat the readings. Here the readings are quite fast if you are using a Prager shell. So please, 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 now onwards, don't use your contact biometry for your IOL calculation. It is never consistent. In certain situations, which we'll talk about later on, where you have posterior cephalloma or something, this is a method which can be used where you have a horizontal immersion B-scan carried out with a simultaneous A-scan vector. This is normally used in ophthalmic ultrasound. The disadvantage here is the equipment is slightly expensive, because you need to have a B-scan along with an A-scan, and you need to be familiar with it. But in certain situations, this is the best possible thing available. How do we interpret? You need to take the single best scan, magnify it, edit its spike, check for anomalies, print it out, and compare to the other eye. There are various spikes. This is for contact. You have the anterior corneal anterior lenticular capsule, posterior lenticular capsule, retina, sclera, and the orbital tract. For the immersion, you will have the first spike from the probe, and the rest of the spike remains the same. For a proper beam alignment, you will be able to see that all the spikes are tall and they are in a particular shape. When the beam alignment is off the visual axis, you have unequal spikes from the lens. The anterior and posterior lens spikes are not of the same height. So this is giving you an idea that there is something wrong with the reading which you have taken. If it is misaligned and passing through the optic nerve, there won't be any scleral spike. So again, that is the spike behind the retina of the sclera is missing if the beam is passing through the optic nerve. If the beam is not perpendicular, the retinal spike and the scleral spike won't be of the same height. So again, you need to study these spikes to get an idea about the accuracy of your reading. There are multiple causes of erroneously short and long measurements. And again, validation criteria for each measurement or each type of method is important. If there is a difference of more than 0.3 millimeter between two eyes, if the axial length is too short or too long, if the measurement don't correlate with the spectacle power of the eye, if there is difficulty in obtaining due to the certain situations of the patient, and if there is a fixation problem. Contact ASN, 50% of the surgeon post-operative surprises with A-scans are quite common. An error of 2 diopter or more is always there with A-scan related contact. So all A-scan unique make mistake in echo interpretation. So what is the best part? As of now, we have something which is a non-contact method. The first one to get this in was Carl Zeiss. You had the IOL master. It works on the Michelson interferometry principle where you don't touch the eye. The consistency is quite high and so is the accuracy. Now you also have Hexstreet which launched LensStar in 2009. They provide anterior chamber depth, lens thickness, axial length measurement, keratometry and white to white in a single reading. Moreover, now you have all new formulas in the machine, so you don't need to go take the values to your internet and try to analyze them. Few things you need to understand. There are different maximas in any IOL master or LensStar readings, and the most important thing is the SNR value or the sound to noise ratio. It has to be more than 2. If it is slightly lesser, it is borderline. If it is less than 1.6, you don't use that reading. However, the most important thing is primary waveform and not just the SNR value. You need to examine the waveforms here also. The advantages being they are easy and even technician can do it if trained properly. There is no contact, so no chances of transmitting the infection. No water bath needed. Can measure through glasses also. It is accurate in silicon filled eye and Holaday 2 formula as well as Haigis, and even for piggyback IOL it is important. As I told you, when you are going for K readings, LensStar theoretically is slightly more better than IOL master. The most important is you being the part of the process. Machine automation does not substitute your clinical judgment and experience. If the measurement don't make sense with the IOL, kindly investigate. Retake the measurement, have a second person verifying them. If everything else fails, verify with an alternative method. You will need to keep your immersion ultrasound skills always ready, even in the era of IOL master. The reason being there are certain situations where IOL master doesn't work. And this is where immersion ultrasound is useful. A 4+ Brunison cataract, a central posterior capsular plaque, a vitreous hemorrhage, or a central corneal scar. So immersion should not be thrown away just by getting a very good feel or a look at the IOL master. Why is it so accurate to measure? Obviously, there are legal liabilities, but moreover, more often than not, it is your expectation and the patient expectations which you need to fulfill after the surgery. There are 2 new things which are coming up. Carl Zeiss has come with the swept source biometry, which is impregnated in the IOL Master 700. And now, probably in few years, you will have ray tracing technology, which is going to be the future, in which there is standard regression para-axial formulas, which we presently use, are going to replace by personal ray tracing calculation. And each and every measurement will be calculated and personalized depending upon the eye. The diopter of the IOL will then be added to the software, and the software will decide which diopter is best for that eye. So it might be that your normal calculation or power might be giving a particular IOL, but the customized might be giving you a better option. So over the period of time, technology is trying to minimize your errors. and we hope that a time comes when you have IOL with 0.25 diopter of increment and technology to measure them. Thank you.